So welcome everyone to AIRS 3. It's great to be here with you this afternoon. We are looking at the modules Organising the Literature, Managing Data and Collaboration. And this is a pretty practical session. I mean, this session's going to be helpful in the initial periods. Some of it's going to be helpful in the initial periods as you start to collect a lot of information. As we looked at the databases yesterday, you would be collecting heaps of information along the way and hopefully making notes about that information that you're finding. And so we want you to think about the techniques that you're going to use. It's really a view of information management. So how are you going to manage your information along the way? That's a really big deal, right? The other one, so yeah, develop a systematic approach to, this sounds scary, coding the literature. It's not going to be scary. I will unpack that for you. Note taking and managing your notes. So that idea really of, okay, I'm reading this paper today. How will I understand what I meant and all those notes that I made today in 18 months time or something like that. So that idea that we looked at yesterday, being effective and efficient searchers, but also information managers really. We'll look at this bibliographic management software. We're going to use Endnote just as an example today. Well, I hope so, because I can't get my Endnote on this machine. Just as an example of some sort of software that you might use to assist you to gather records, gather PDF documents, write notes, etc. So we're going to look at that, and this is actually one of the questions in your resource log. Number 1 and 2 are, that's for sure. So I'm going to do the first section, and then Catherine will come in and she will look at data management strategies. So what's expected of you as a researcher here at QUT? So how will you organise that information? What are the really important things that you need to know about collecting data, analysing data, storing data, that sort of thing? Clearly, we can't cover everything in this 2.5-hour session, but we're going to touch on some of the most salient points, the things that you need to maybe go back and have a look at in your own time as well. We will commence a data management plan. So as researchers, you are expected at the beginning of every project to create a data management plan. It's a plan like just anything else you would do. So you're designing a project, and then this will be the blueprint that you're going to use to actually get to a successful completion of that project. And we'll look at going to a conference to attend and what would be the networking benefits of attending that conference. Okay, they're the learning outcomes for today. We've got quite a bit to do. So of course, we always look at the content. How does today's content impact on what's expected of you in the resource log? So I'd ask you to open your resource log and have a look at 1, organising the literature, 2, managing data, and 3, collaboration. They're the areas that we're touching on today. So I'm just going to minimize my screen and get across. And I'm hoping that you can now see the AIRS website, and we're going to the assessment. So I'm opening up the resource log template, as hopefully you're able to do as well. And just scrolling down, the first part I wanted to look at is module 7. So module 7, what's expected of you? In fact, I don't. Yes, I do. I want to explain what the content is that impacts on your resource log. So module 7, organising the literature. Name and describe and evaluate a bibliographic management software application that might be useful to you in your research. So we'll look at this today. It might be Endnote, it could be Mendeley, it could be Zotero, it could be all sorts of other software that is available to you. We know that some of you have used these softwares before, and so you will be well aware of what the advantages and limitations are, while others haven't. So my, I guess, advice to you is, if you haven't used this sort of software and you're thinking about which one you'd use, firstly, check in with your supervisor as to see which one they are using, and then do a search on the internet and find out what other people are saying about the advantages and limitations of that software, particularly if you haven't used it before. Part B, this always gets people a little bit confused, but I don't want to confuse you. I want to make sure that you understand what we're saying here about coding literature. If you don't like coding, please think about it as categorization. So I'm going to go into this in a little bit of depth today. But just to know that you've got an overarching question, and then you'll have lots of sub-questions that will come from that overarching question, and you'll need to delineate between them. So that'll be the areas of research. And for those, you will give it some sort of code. So we'll come back to this. We'll do a little activity around that, but we'll come back to this in session. The next one that I'm going to look at is describe methods you might use to make useful notes and to organise your notes to access and use your ideas and research findings. So yes, we do want to know how you actually make your notes. So are you making notes on post-its and putting it on an article and hoping that they don't fall off? They might have coffee stains on it, etc. Or have you got something more sophisticated going on, where you might be using a literature grid, you might be using the markup capability in PDFs, etc. So today what I'm going to do is give you lots of ideas of what it could look like. Now, when it comes down to it, your system, your organizational system is personal. It's about how you like to think, how you like to organize information. So I want you to think at the very beginning, how do you already make useful notes, and what could change because of the information that we're sharing today? So how you make them, but just as well how you organize them. So that's really important, because how will you find those notes again once you have made them? And like I say, all those months down the track, how will you come back to that? So Catherine will actually revisit some of this. Well, she'll go into module 8, so I don't want to touch that right now, but this is the content that I'm covering today. And so I'll just hop back to my PowerPoint. So hopefully we're back at this screen. You can all see this screen of research support. So firstly, I want to identify all the support that's there at QUT for HDR students in terms of research support. E-research, the Office of E-research, they're very useful. They're a very useful lot of people. So they're really into the techie aspect of things. So they'd be able to assist you with data conversion, analysis and storage, including access to large storage infrastructure locally and interstate. So this is getting you to think about, okay, what sort of data would I actually be collecting, and how big would it be, and what sort of processes will I need? They're going to be really helpful for that. But also they provide good information on qualitative and quantitative data analysis. So a lot of you will be collecting original data, primary data, and you'll have to do something with it. So are you going to use qualitative methods? Are you going to use quantitative? And do you know what they would be? These guys are going to be very useful. So I've added all these links here as a place for you to go to get that assistance. There is really heaps and heaps of training opportunities. Now, clearly the library runs a lot, as does GRED, the Graduate Research Education and Development area. And you can see here on this link that there's training events. There's a whole heap of them. including the ability to personalize your learning journey. So I've left that there for you too. Have a look for the calendar of events. Go back there on a regular basis to see what is happening in terms of training. And we have lots and lots of software through IT Assist. So the software might include something like, if you're doing quantitative analysis, it could be SPSS for statistical analysis, it could be NVivo for qualitative analysis, it could be Leximancer for text mining, it could be Key Survey for managing surveys, all sorts of software. So in your own time, go and investigate these areas. Okay. So once upon a time, we used to be able to maybe write assignments and things like that by just knowing the style that we're using and being able to use that appropriately. That was probably fine for undergraduate world, but actually for postgraduate and particularly a HDR journey, you need to be clear that you will need to make a decision about which software you're going to use. So they're called bibliographic management softwares and why we need them. So I'm going to go through that in a little bit of detail. So we're using Endnote as an example. Now, that's fine, but know that that doesn't mean you have to use Endnote. I'm going to say this again. Please contact your supervisors and ask them what bibliographic software they're using and make sure that you use the same one. So some are using Mendeley and Zotero and that sort of thing. A lot are using Endnote. So that would be my tip for this. But all of those softwares do these things. So you can import and export, store, organize, and use references to information sources. They also allow you to use some word processing package that will help you write that thesis, that very long thesis. And you can imagine with a thesis of 70 to 100,000 words, you're going to have a heap of references that need organizing. So that's really important. It allows you to create files and references called EndNote libraries, and it becomes your personal library, if you like. So I've got one library for multiple purposes, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But this is not an EndNote class. This really is about thinking about how you can make that software be a good file management service to you. So it's really the storage of the PDFs, the figures, the pictures, the tables, the notes, etc. So using it in that way. So what I might do is get Catherine to share her screen of EndNote and I'll talk through it. Is that okay with you, Catherine? Great, that worked. Oops, that worked really well. Can everybody see Catherine's screen? Fantastic. Thank you for raising your hand. That's awesome. Okay, so what we're going to do now is talk through some of the file management features of EndNote. So some of my favorite ones are groups. So you can have up to 500 groups. And we're going to create what's called a smart group. We'll create a group set. Sorry, Catherine, a group set, please. Thank you. And we're going to call this PhD. Excellent. And then we'll create a group within the PhD set. And we're going to call that perhaps chapter 1, or we could call it introduction. So chapter 1, and then we could create yet another, and we could call it chapter 2. So what I'm suggesting here is that you start to organize your information around the outcome that you're working towards. So in a lot of the things that I do, I will call the project something, and then I'll have my subsets. Now, Catherine, could you move some records, please, into chapter 1 and chapter 2? Excellent. So she's just going to move these into the appropriate area. So what's happening here is that I'm being able to, or we're being able to categorize the records in our EndNote library into some structure. So I would highlight this to you as a really good way to go forward. So instead, say for instance, I've got a very large database, which is, this is my personal library, this is my personal database. It might be that I might have 1,000 records, and this one's got 253, as you can see. If I had 1,000 records and they were uncategorized, do you know what that would do to my heart rate? It would send it through the roof. So this is what we're trying to do here, is to actually settle everything down and make sure that we've got some sort of organized structure. So that's my first tip. And you might like it, you might not. Remember, I'm giving you lots of tips for you to then make a considered view of what your organizational system will look like. Great, Catherine, can we now go back to groups? And we'll create a smart group. So I usually have a different database that I use here. So I'm just scrolling down to see what we could call this group name. It could be financial distress, I think. Can we give it a name of financial distress? And then we're going to change to keyword. And we're looking for keywords in this database of, let's see, counselling. Excellent. And then do the search. Yes, lovely. So what's happened here is another, oh, I don't think we found anything. That's a shame. I think we've got something going wrong there, but we can try that one again. What about okay, see if that works. Yep. Okay, that's wonderful, thank you. So here we have brought together all of those records in the EndNote library that actually have a keyword that we identified. Now that's all very good, that's retrospective, but the good thing about this is that when you actually bring records in from other databases in the future, and the system will scan the records and then automatically put them into, if they equal the search syntax that we created, they will automatically put them into this group. Now that's being efficient and effective, I think. Great. All references. Can we go to all references, please, Catherine? It's really weird me not driving, but it's good. So let's have a look at the all references. I just want to open up one of those references. Thanks, Catherine. And we're just having a quick look at the fields. So you can see there's fields in this record, and we're scrolling down to, she says as she looks for it, you can see the keywords. So we were hooking into those keywords with our search. And then we could also, if we did that sort of search before, we could have sort of made one for authors as well. So you can do lots of those. I want to make a note or make a comment about the notes field. You can see in the record that notes fields have been populated by the database. This happens a lot of the time. However, the research notes field does not get populated by anyone but you. So you have this as an ability to go in and type in about up to 16 pages of notes in any one record. So I highlight that as something you might use. Can we just zip back up to label field, please, Catherine? So I still, even though we have groups, I still use the label field because sometimes I've been asked when I've been doing systematic reviews, can you pull together all of those records that you searched in PubMed on that particular day? So if, Catherine, you could type in PubMed and today's date. Lovely. And then close out of that record, save the record, please. And then when we get back over to our search bar, we're able to search on the label field. And if we just type in PubMed, yes, and PubMed. So what this is demonstrating is the ability for you to co-locate records. And so very easily, even if I had 1,000 records in there, I've been able to pull this one out. So that's another option for you. Great, thanks, Catherine. Can we go back to all references again? Thank you. And so we'll do now a Control A on all of the references. Thank you. We'll go to the full text. So find full text feature. Now, find full text feature, there is the ability, or we've created the ability for Endnote with a piece of middleware to access some of the full text of from some of our databases. So what you'll start to see when this is active is a little meter running down the side under full text that's looking for the full text of the articles in some databases. Now, the good thing about this is that if you've got to authenticate as well, the good thing about this is that, oh, I'm not sure what's happening. There we are. There's the little meter running down the side, searching 248. And you can see as that they get pulled in, it brings in a little paper clip. And so that's the full text being brought in. Now, remember, I'm about being effective and efficient. And I think this is a great way to actually start to bring in those PDFs. So in some of the disciplines, such as medicine, sciences, you can get up to 70 or 80% of the PDFs coming in this way. When I worked with accountants, we got about 30%. So it really depends on the area that you're working in and where the papers are coming from and whether they're indexed widely in those databases that we're accessing. But I think this is a really good time saver. Great, so can we go into one of those records with, thank you, with the PDF and just double click. Oh, and we'll go down to the full text. So this is, if we open up the full text here, what you've got is the ability to use the PDF markup usually. So Catherine's going to show us where you could place a comment within the text or highlight. So you can use the PDF markup within the article to highlight. You could put a text box around. You could actually start making your notes there. It's still going through indexing all those PDFs. There's sticky notes, etc. So this is another idea. You could make a comment, and maybe the comment is something like an evaluation of the whole paper, etc. So another idea for you would save that on the way out, which we're not going to do. That's great, Catherine. Can we go back to the screen with Endnote, please? Fantastic. And we'll just look at all references. I think they're just taking a little while to come down. And the last thing I wanted to note here was about rating. So you can see that there's a field called rating. Now, my view, and this will come through this session quite a lot, is that while you're reading, you need to be evaluating. So the ability to rate as you go is a really good thing. So for instance, I might say that I'm going to give I was going to say that first record, but they keep updating. Nurse navigation, I'm going to give that paper a rating of 5. That's a must-have for my thesis. Whereas I might actually have others that I've collected, however, they're not as good as I thought they were, or they're not as good as what the abstract sounded like. I know that's really happened to me a lot, and I might give them a star rating of 2, etc. So this is a quick way, if you like, to determine the value of articles as you're collecting them. They're really some of the nice features that I wanted to show you in Endnote and other like software that you might engage with. Thanks, Catherine. I might get you to now stop sharing your screen and I'll go back to sharing. So here we are back at my PowerPoint, and there are some caveats to Endnote, or avoiding the pitfalls. Now, I've added this as a slide because I've had various conversations with liaison librarians who have said to me, these are some of the things that happen with students when they're using Endnote. So the cutting and pasting text containing formatted Endnote citations cannot be done safely without risk of document corruption. So that's something really important to note at the outset. So the idea, convert to unformatted citations before moving text around. So that's number 1 to put down in your memory bank for that. And we always say one document, one Endnote library. So you cannot connect a single Word document to multiple Endnote libraries. And I'd also say that I use one Endnote library for multiple purposes. So as you're working through collecting information for your thesis, as we just showed in Endnote, you might also be writing a paper, maybe for Nature or some great journal. You might actually be on a project at work where you're needing some references, and you just as well might be preparing something for a conference. So you could use the one Endnote library using the groups features to do that. Now I want to think about, for you to think about, what software do you think you'll use? Have you used previous software before? Will you use that same software? Maybe. Or will you consider using something else? Okay, so there are hands-on support. So when it comes to, I'm going to go back to this idea of Endnote, there are hands-on workshops. However, we are going to work on some other software workshops as well. So we're upskilling in that department. There is installation assistance from the IT help desk. There's help from your liaison librarians. There's online tutorials from the LinkedIn Learning. Now, I know that was down this week. However, it's back up, and really good place to go and sort out any of these IT sort of information needs, as well as other things. And then also there's a link here to writing your thesis using Word reference guide. And we also have a comparison table. So at that link, find out if you haven't made a decision yet, or you haven't spoken to your supervisor about what tool to use, and you're sort of sitting on the fence, maybe this comparison table will help you out. I have to say, I love the help that we can get from this sort of software. It makes our lives so much easier when we're writing papers or writing a thesis, that sort of thing. This section is all about, I guess, talking about organising, taking and organising your notes, but really, you can't read everything. So I want to start off with, okay, how do you understand the value of a paper or a piece of information without having to read it completely, because we can't read everything. So Do you skim and scan? Do you evaluate as you're going and say, for instance, use a star rating to understand which papers are going to be essential and which aren't so good? Which ones have to be read completely? So my way is, because I was in sciences, I read the introduction quickly, I scan down to the methodology because that's really important to my area. I quickly go to the confusions, yeah, the conclusions, and then hop down to the reference list to see if I know any of the authors, etc. So that's my quick way, and then I give it some sort of rating. But how will you select valuable articles? I'm going to leave that question with you, and if you wish to put something in the chat box, please do. So this brings us to this idea of, firstly, coding the literature, but really, how do you stop, I guess, over collecting? And I don't know about you, but I overgather. I always have, because I find a lot of information very interesting, and so I want to gather it, and it might not be completely on my topic. So how do you stop yourself from overgathering, or do you stop yourself from overgathering? Well, one thing is I keep my research question by my computer, so I can actually relate back to that very quickly. But I also use Endnote, so I will collect that information and I'll put it in a category called For Later. So that is a really strange way to do things, I know, but it's actually sated my desire to collect that information, but I've also categorized it. So I want you to think about how that might occur for you. So sometimes overgathering can take you, you may stray off the target, and you might need to limit yourself to the scope of the question. So thinking about that. Okay, so this is an example of what I'm talking about, that overarching question. So here's an overarching question. What factors characterize a successful mentoring relationship with minority students? That's the big question. But as we know in the thesis and as we go along, we'll be answering sub-questions as well. So these 4 sub-questions are likely to be something that I'll need to have information on. So I'll need to have a pot of information on characteristics of successful mentoring as differentiated between academic mentoring of minority students and of university students, and then factors that affect the completion of graduate degrees. So that's quite a lot of information. So what I want to do is just go over. I'm going to use the annotation tool and the text box, how we might actually use a really simple coding or categorization system. So for my first one, it might be just SM for successful mentoring. The second might be AM/MS. The third might be AM/MS. And the last might be grad. That might be a very simple system, right? So it doesn't need to be a complicated system. So it's a way of differentiating between that information, because they are answering perhaps separate, although they come under the banner of the overarching question, they are separate questions and would need a logical sequence to then lead you to be able to find that information easily. So here we are thinking about your coding system or your categorization system. So are you going to use a word or a short phrase? Could it be a numerical code? And remember, for those mathematicians and engineers in the audience, It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to have 5 or 6 numbers, etc. You certainly don't want to make a coding system too complex, because then you'll have to have a coding book to actually look up what you meant. An icon, an acronym, or an abbreviation. Now, for me, I used to work with someone in at the Royal, and he used to, and I can't draw this for you because I don't have that drawing capability here, but he used to think in icons, and we were doing research on heart disease and the effect on kidney and liver. And so he had lots of coloured hearts, coloured livers, and coloured kidneys in coloured filing cabinets or files. So that was his way. That was his way that he thought about information that resonated for him. So I want for you to actually think about that as we pop you into a breakout room. So I'm going to pop you into a breakout room, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to actually think about what your coding system will be. So you'll be placed into a breakout room with several other students. You have 5 minutes to discuss your coding or categorization system with the group. You can use the chat, the microphones, the shared tools within the breakout room. After 5 minutes, I'll bring you back to the main room where you can start to document your codes in your resource log. So remembering this is a question in your resource log. If you would like to help or ask any question while in the room, use the Ask for Help button, and we will come through the rooms as well. So let's see, we can now get over to a breakout room. All right, so I hope you were able to discuss some of the opportunities coding, and the rooms that I were in, that there were a couple of talking about icons or small drawings, as we can see there on the chat, but also abbreviations seem to be very popular. So happy for you to add to the chat as to what your system will be, but remembering that this is a question in your resource log as well. Okay, that brings me to devising a note-taking system. What's it going to look like? Well, on screen, and hopefully you can see the screen. On screen, you'll see that there is a bibliographic reference. There is a direct quote, or before the direct quote, there is a phrase as the code. So that's an example of what it might look like. There is a direct quote, and note that they actually have added the author, the year, and the page number to go back to that quote. That's really important, because some of the plagiarism that happens is due to incorrect quoting and referencing. So important to do that. There's a summary, but the most important aspect, or one of the most important aspects, I think, is your analysis. So this is what I'm encouraging you to do, is to write an analysis as you go with your reading. As you're going through, you make sure that you make an analysis. So is the author opposed, has an opposing view from you, etc. So a summary, direct quote or paraphrase of the author's words and ideas. Your own comments, ideas, analysis, reflection, reactions to their views, the bibliographic reference, and a code that connects the note to a concept from your research question. So I think this is a really good way forward. I'm going to also now just play a little video, and it's weird because it's of me in a classroom situation, but it's actually identifying a way to keep notes, and it's just one idea. It's called the literature grid. So I'm going to quickly play that for you.
Hello, and welcome to this note-taking session. You know, we started to collect a lot of information, and particularly after AIRS 2. So what has to happen now is to be thinking about how to organise that information. Because it's really great finding the information, but then what do we do with it? I I mean, if we were to leave it in a pile somewhere, that would be so hard, wouldn't it, to actually find what you need when you need it. What we need to do as a higher degree student and anyone who is doing comprehensive searching is to have an organisational strategy. It's really thinking about your system of organising information. What will that look like? How do you think? How do you actually organise information, say, in any other aspect of your life? So it's worth giving some thought to. And today we're going to actually look at how you might record information about the information that you're gathering. These are tried and true methods that other students have used, other researchers have used and continue to use. These will continue to see you in good stead over your research career. Here we are. We have firstly citations. So where did we get this information from? That's a really important aspect to note down because it will actually assist us not to plagiarise or inadvertently plagiarise. So that's a really important thing. So we're going to write down citation here. Citation. Often, it's important to know what the methodology of the article is or the methodology that they've used to create that research or to collect the research. So we'll have methodology. What I'd like you to really think about doing is, as you're reading your articles, you need to be thinking about analysing that information. So the analysis is a really important part of your first take at those papers. So you might actually give it some sort of star rating as you're going. So we might have analysis here, or it might be an overview. What was your perception of that paper or that report or that chapter, a book chapter? We might then think about coding it or theming that information in some way. And sometimes you might give it a label. The label might be pertinent to the chapter that you're writing in your thesis, for instance. It might be a theme, it might be a code, it could be a label here. So there's some really good ideas of some of the columns you might use. There are others as well. So you might use limitations. What is the limitation to this article? So that's a really important aspect because I think what we can do is that we can just read the article without considering the limitations, and sometimes the limitations will actually lead you on to the gaps. So is this a gap in the literature which hopefully your research is going to fill? So that's one way. That's called a literature grid.
Note-taking software. So you might actually be wanting to use some software to help you make your notes. So these are some ideas. Again, Evernote for note-taking. Students often tell me that the free version of Evernote is just fine for their purposes. But if you wanted more, what they call grunt to the software, you could pay an extra $5, I think that's American, to get more downloads capability. Papers and Scrivener are available for a free trial for 30 days. I use OneNote. So I like to use OneNote because it actually comes with the software, with software I already have. So I use OneNote. It's available with Microsoft Office, and you can see that I've organized it such like a journal article that I was writing. So the introduction, the literature review, methodology, analysis. So again, that's that idea of organization based on what my outcome is, or my outcome, my piece of work that I'm wanting to create. What we've tried to show you here is an information management workflow. So you'll need to find some bibliographic software to build a library of your references. We've already discussed that. You'll need an organizational filing system for so a naming system. In that, you'll also need to think about version control. So if any of you have actually published, you might remember, if you're doing collaborative work, that on the last day or the couple of days before, you're actually sending lots of versions back and forth. That may well happen with your supervisors as well, with the pieces that, the chapters that you're reading, writing. And so what's your version control going to be? If you don't know, have a look on the internet. There's lots of options there. Will you use the functions such as grouping to organize your references? You might classify your records references with labels or research notes. That might be something useful. You could take notes in a program such as Evernote or OneNote, something like that. You might use concept maps, and then you might put the concept maps into headings in Word, which become part of your the backbone or the structure of your thesis. So what we tried to do there is just give you some ideas about how to go forward with this information management workflow.